Sweet. I guess we can get started. Um, so we're obviously talking about St. Augustine's The Confessions. We're on books 7 and 8 now. And everything before, or at least previously in the past meetings, we've talked a lot about his upbringing, his relationship with his mom, but most notably would be his interaction with these Manichaeans. And the Manichaeans were a sect, or like this like small religious group, or not small, but they were a very prominent religious group in the medieval times, and they had some pretty funky beliefs. And we talked about how some of their beliefs were, for example, this that there was this cosmic, eternal battle between good and evil, like they're like in the sky somehow, or like in the stars, there was just like a big cloud of evil and good always fighting against each other, which was very, very different, or very, very opposed to the Christian thought that there was just one all-powerful good God. So Augustine is like interacting with all these guys, but and he's teaching in their schools. He's hanging out with all the prophets of the Manichaeans. And then eventually he starts to like fall out of interest, or starts to like lose the grip that the Manichaeans have on him, and he starts to question them and press them, and he's not liking their answers anymore. He's just realizing that these guys are, at the end of the day, just very good talkers. They talk very fluently. They're great orators. They're very well versed in rhetoric. They can recite poems off the back of their hands. Beautiful speeches they give, but at the end of the day, the meat of what they're saying is empty. It's just word salad. It's just like gibberish. Everything they're talking about. So he falls out of uh out of style with these guys. He starts to really, really doubt everything about them. He still completely believes in the Christian God, though, which is very important to understand. He loves God, he understands God, but he wants to fully understand God. And he's not there yet. He doesn't fully understand God. He can't wrap his mind around this concept of something like infinite, or the nature of God. He can't put his finger down and say, okay, exactly here, this is what God is. And that frustrates him a tiny bit. Most notably, though, what frustrates him is the problem of evil. And very like simply put, the problem of evil is the whole issue of if there is an all-loving, all-good, all-knowing God, which are the omni attributes, the three things that all theologians will ascribe to God. If God is perfect and good and smart and all of these things, why is there evil in the world? Why is there so much goddamn suffering? Why are people murdered? Why are babies suffocated? Why are there wars? How could a good God allow that? And this is the problem of evil. And everyone deals with it, or tries to find some sort of reason, objection, or answer to it in one way, shape, or form. But Augustine, upon some meditation, he finally realizes this evil that he's always looking at, or this evil that he's always concerned with, he's thinking about it the wrong way, or he's going about it the wrong way. He's not understanding it the way it should be understood. The way you or me might see evil as, it's as this like thing that is that's bad. It's just like someone acting in an immoral way, or something tragic happening, like something truly just negative out in the world. And that's not exactly how Augustine is seeing it. Augustine is seeing it in the form of privation, or in the form of absence. So he's understanding evil not as a thing, but as the absence of good. So there, in Augustine's eyes, he comes to understand there is no such thing as evil. There is only absence of good, absence of God, disbelief in God, disbelief in good. So whenever you're seeing something evil happening, or something very, very bad happening in Augustine's eyes, it's not that something bad is happening. It's just that there's not something good happening. Which is it was a pretty like extreme take at the time. That's not how most theologians were solving or rectifying this problem of evil. But that's how he is kind of coming. He's starting to understand the nature of God. He's able to like put his finger down on on God. And that was book 7, basically, him grappling with the nature of God. But book 8, then, he figures out, more or less, how to solve this issue of the problem of evil. And then he moves on towards his conversion, I guess. He makes a friend called Simplicius or something like that. He makes this friend, and they're spending time together at their house over in, I think they're in Milan at the time. Um, they're spending time, they're walking around the garden, whatever, and this anxiety starts to overcome Augustine. This like big weight, this absolute like death starts to like surround his mind. This like tormenting starts surrounding his mind. And he doesn't know what to do with it. He starts to have this like little panic attack basically. He starts to like scratch his head and pace back and forth, and he's starting to talk, and it's not making sense. And his friend, he doesn't really know what to do. He sees the distress that's going on in Augustine, but he doesn't know exactly how to help him. So he just watches, he just observes, he lets these emotions like run their course. Um and as this is happening, Augustine decides to go out for a walk, to go out into the garden to get some fresh air. And then at this point, the entire weight of existence, of evil, of impiety, of being with the Manichaeans, of being persuaded and manipulated, he feels like all of these things, they crash down like an absolute wave on him. He's terribly distressed, and he starts to weep and cry and moan, and he's like absolutely killed. And he makes his way to this fig tree. He sets himself down at this fig tree, and he's like ripping the hair out of his head. He doesn't know what to do. And at this moment, he's basically praying or asking God, he's like, if there's anything that you can do for me right now, if there's any way, like, prove yourself, show yourself to me. He ends up being able to pray, cry, do all this stuff. And then at the back of his mind, he starts hearing this voice, and this voice says, read, pick up and read. And he's not too sure what that is, but it turns out one of the kids playing nearby, maybe in the house next door, like in the garden next door, I don't know, but in that same area, he starts to yell, read, pick up and read. And he takes this like voice that he's hearing, this kid that's like screaming at him, he takes this as some sort of divine intervention, as God speaking through the child to him. Pick up and read, pick up and read. So he gathers himself, he composes himself, and he gets back home. He finds his way to a Bible, and the first page he opens up is Romans, or the first chapter, I guess, he opens up is Romans, and he begins reading. And the word that he, or the passage that he reads is very characteristic of like the situation he's been going through. And the passage reads, not in orgies and drunkenness, not in sexual immorality and debauchery, not in dissension and jealousy. Rather, clothe yourself with the Lord Jesus Christ, and do not think about how to gratify the desires of the flesh. And that's very like pungent or immediate in his soul. It like strikes him like an absolute arrow in the heart, because to the Manichaeans, what they were preaching to him the whole time while he was growing up was that the flesh is evil, or the flesh is bad. And so reading this one passage, the first thing he opens up in this book after this like crazy panic attack, to say that you must leave this whole life of drinking and being with women, which was in part like what he was tied down to, right? He was very impious. He was a man of desire at the time. He's being tied down by all this stuff, but the Manichaeans were always saying, yeah, the flesh is evil, the flesh is bad. And now he's opening up this Romans book, and it says, you need to reject the flesh. And then it finally, something clicks, something makes sense to him. And it's that the Manichaeans weren't completely wrong, they were just misleading. Because the Manichaeans took the Old Testament as something that shouldn't be read quite literally. Augustine sees it a different way, though. He totally understands that the Old Testament should be read quite literally. And that's basically where where books 7 and 8 leave off, I guess. Uh, yeah, that's all I have to say. But the problem of evil is something a little bit pretty interesting to me. So I don't know if you guys are still listening or if I was just talking to myself the whole time. That's okay if I was. Um, but do you have anything to say? John Doe or Kevin?
Thanks for the recap.
Hello. So, I was his version, right, is the idea that there is no evil, just a lesser degree of God. Kind of reminded me of something like Dante's Inferno, right? Dante's Divine Comedy, where both heaven and hell have different circles, and each one is like a layer closer to God, and then where God exists in a lesser degree.
Mm-hmm. I don't know if I fully caught all of that. There was a little bit of background noise, but I did get the gist. Yeah. It's tricky to say. Calvin, anything, any thoughts coming to your mind?
Um, the evil is just the absence of good. I think that's what
Mm-hmm.
was mentioned.
Yeah. Yes.
I, um, I think that a very common counter to the idea of evil in regards to God is that evil is a response of free will given to humans by God, right? So essentially, evil is necessary due to God's gift, if you will.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of ways people like one of the common rectifications for evil. One of the most common ones you'll come across if like in contemporary philosophy or like contemporary theology will be that evil does exist, right? They clearly accept that and they posit that, which is different than Augustine. But people will say that yes, evil clearly exists, but it is because of our will, of free will. The whole argument is that God created the perfect world. In a perfect world, there are moral agents. There are people that have the ability to choose for themselves. Um, and only in a perfect world can there be autonomous and free willing agents or people like you and me. But it's because of this free will that he gave us that evil comes about. He created the perfect world, but it's us making immoral decisions, bad decisions, going to war, doing bad things. That's on us. It's not like a thing that God is doing or God is not imparting any type of evil onto the world. He created the perfect world and he gave us in that perfect world free will. And that's the most common position I've heard at least like Christians hold or defend. But that also begs the question of like cool, that makes sense, that explains all of the type of moral evils, right? So like murder or fraud, like stealing, all that type of stuff, but it doesn't fully explain random catastrophic events like an asteroid hitting the earth or like a tsunami going over a city or like a wildfire burning houses. These things, they're a little bit beyond um a will, like a human will. Like no one chooses for there to be a big earthquake, but that stuff still happens. So then Christians have a little bit of a more difficult time defending that position because no longer is evil just something you decide to do or a person decides to do, but it is yeah, it's something greater than or something beyond us. And some people will invoke, or some Christians will invoke spirits, right? So they'll say, oh, that's the work of the devil, or that's the work of certain fallen angels, or what have you. But I don't find that very, very satisfying as a counter or as an answer. Kelvin.
What's your take on good and evil, Chris? Do you think there's a universal or it's relatively subjective?
When it comes to evil,
Yeah, both of them, both good and evil.
I don't know. I'm undecided. I I'm pretty sure. I'm quite sure. I'd put my foot down and say yes. I'm quite sure that there is evil out there in the world. Um, there is bad stuff in the world. Um, and I that's the one contention I might have with these three attributes of God, with his all goodness, all wiseness, and all power. I can't. There is no way around justifying that type of evil. There's a lot of people that say, "Oh, it's because we're judged in the afterlife, and it's the choices that we make here that really matter for like passing this whole test." And there's other people who say, "Yeah, like, oh, it's like it's all up to us. The evil that exists is just our will." None of that is satisfying to me. I just there's too much evil in the world, and I don't know. To my eyes, if there is a God, I don't want to call him God. Not with the stuff that this world entails. Even if there's some sort of like redemption, or like it's all gonna be okay at the end of the day, then like there's just some stuff in this world that is not. I cannot justify. I cannot say that's okay. The problem of evil is one of the biggest um hurdles I have for belief in a all good, all knowing God. Yeah, I don't know. What do you guys think?
This this reminds me of a story that I was reading, where someone makes the point that man is the only truly evil being in the universe, right? Because animals cannot reason, animals just move on instinct, but man can think and they can act on malice.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Yeah. Yeah, that basically is most most defenses of that problem. Calvin, what do you think?
Sorry, 1 second. Uh,
You're good. You're good.
so if evil exists, the Christian God can't, but maybe some God can, like some type of God,
Mm-hmm.
because the Christian God is like a a personified version of like man. I hear.
Yeah, no, you're totally right, and that's what the Manichaeans were kind of preaching. They believed in God completely, um, but they also believed the whole Jesus Christ issue. That was not the perfect version of God because he was in meat and he was man. Yeah.
Mhm.
I I have a question. So, uh, you know, like Christians think that life is, I don't know, let's say some 60, 70 years, right? And after that, you get judged, and then your fate is eternal. What do you think about if it is such a short amount of time relative to eternity
Mm-hmm.
that that might be perception of God, right? Like, oh, maybe like humans only suffer for 70 years, but then the reward is far greater.
Good question. I don't think I have a very satisfying answer for you. Do you have any intuitions? Any first things that come to mind?
I'm the same as you. I don't have a satisfying answer, especially to a non-believer.
Yeah. I wish Cade or Bruno, some of the other strong believers, strong defenders of God were here. They they all have there's a lot of arguments to defend God. Um, but I don't know none of them. None of them satisfy the problem of evil to me. It's almost like saying, at least the way I sometimes think about it. It's like imagine you see a burning house and there are people crying for help and you're just watching on the outside and you're some sort of fireman, you can stop this fire. And for whatever reason, it might be a great reason. You say that no, you shouldn't put out the fire, you shouldn't help them because XYZ. Regardless of whatever XYZ is, regardless of the justification for you not putting out the fire, in my eyes, what you're doing is wrong. What you're doing is bad. So this isn't taking away from the existence of God. It's just taking away the all goodness of God. And that's the problem of evil. And that's what the Manichaeans, they dealt with this problem pretty cleverly. Maybe would be like a way to sell it. Because God had those three attributes, right? All power, all knowing, all goodness. The Manichaeans took one of those things away and they solved this problem of evil. They took away all goodness. They just said, "Oh, okay, well," or no, they took away God's all power, right? His all powerness. So it's like, yes, he's a perfectly good God and he's a perfectly all knowing God. He's just not completely powerful or like 100% powerful, and in that way, they were able to create this fully functioning cosmic battle or eternal struggle between good and evil. Because if God were perfectly powerful, he would just be able to overcome all of the evil, get rid of it. But they saw that wasn't the case. They need to deal with all the evil there is in the world, and they said, you know what, maybe God isn't all powerful. He could have been the creator, cool. He could be all knowing, he could be all good, he's a great guy, but maybe he's just not all powerful. Maybe he's very, very strong, of course. He can move mountains and perform miracles. But maybe he just isn't as powerful as we thought he was. And for those reasons there's evil. Just a clever way out of it. You're not negating God, but you're removing the godliness of God in a way.
Yeah, I have also thought about. I've thought about that a few times, and something that I thought about is that if evil, right, perfectly good God, evil comes from man, then man created evil, something that God cannot create, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But God created man, so it would be the creation creating something that a omnipotent creator cannot.
Yeah, like he created the possibility for evil.
Yeah.
And that's, some people will be like, that's completely justified because of the amount of good that humans can do, or the amount of good that existence is. It's like it's completely worthwhile for some people to exist with evil. Um, but
It kind of reminds me of a conversation I had with Ego back when we were both in high school, and we had it for like no joke, like 5 hours. And I said that humans are emotional creatures that can think, right? And I don't know if he supported the position or if he was playing devil's advocate, but he proposed that humans are logical creatures that can feel.
logical creatures that can feel.
Um, yeah.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like what are they primarily, right?
Mm-hmm.
I said emotional because on a fundamental level, we are, animals,
Mhm.
and we can choose to reason and be kind to each other. But the keyword is can, right? At the end of the day, it's a choice given by free will.
Yeah. Whether or not I think we are predominantly emotional creatures, even if we try and sidestep it or justify our reason. At the end of the day, we're purely emotional. The reason we live our lives and do the things we do is because we feel certain ways about things. You can say, oh, it's for this reason or that reason, or try and justify it or come up with some argument, but I don't know. At the end of the day, everyone does what they do because it makes them feel okay or feel something. So I would err on the side of saying that humans are a lot more emotional than we are rational.
There's a fun quote from economics of all things, like classical, and then you get like Keynes. And like classicals, to just boil it down simply, we're like, oh, we are, rational agents that make our decisions by utility. And Keynes refuted it, but didn't really go into detail and kind of just was like, yeah, we kind of just have like animal spirits and make decisions and we don't really know why. Which now that I think of it, isn't necessarily emotion, but I do think emotion, you could argue, plays a factor in something like that. So I do agree with that. I think we make emotional decisions and we don't even necessarily understand it because emotion isn't like elicit understanding like reason does. Is that making sense what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I get that. It's a good point. And it's why when if we're talking about economics, that's why markets move. Purely emotion. Just like a collective emotion, I guess.
Yeah. Fear and greed, as my dad says, is what moves the market.
Fear and greed, or FOMO, or FUD, any of that stuff. That's actually that's what got me into psychology in high school, or like yeah, like in grade 8 and 9 and stuff. I was very interested on why people how markets moved, why people would buy something, and at the end, and I figured out like it's terribly emotional, um, and that was my gateway drug. I did like some like funky trading. I got into crypto, all that stuff, but that was my gateway drug into psychology or into trying to understand why people do things. And I still don't know. I still I still don't know. 10 years after, I'm fucking confused.
I don't know how tangential this is because I just joined, but this was kind of in my head earlier today and it reminded me of it. I need to find the book. It was a psychology book. And it was talking about how like some of like the most successful people in the world, artists, even Einstein, he mentioned a lot of their like logical and reason ideas are like buried in their subconscious. Like the book I remember used the example that like Einstein believed that the theory of relativity kind of existed subconsciously in his brain forever and he had to use like his brain to almost bring it to the surface.
Interesting. Interesting. Yeah, no, that is. And that also that echoes a lot in Augustine, because Augustine was like a lot he loved Plato, right? Or he loved these Socratics.
Yeah.
And Plato and all of them, they believed in that theory of forms and of recollection. They believed that when we like learn things or when we understand things or come to truths like the general relativity, we're not actually there's nothing new that's happening. Nothing at all is being discovered. We're just remembering, um, as if we already knew this type of stuff and just something caught our eye or something helped us understand. And that's how we come to know things. And that, yeah, you're right. That is what that is what Einstein talks about when he was talking about his all of his discoveries, all of his maths. It wasn't like, oh nice, like I found something, like I found the needle in the haystack. It wasn't like that. It was like it was always there. He just had to bring it about, bring it to like to light, but it was always there. Very interesting. Do you guys think we learn 2 plus 2? or do we have to see it in the world to understand it?
Well, I forgot what it was, but there were elements that were theorized before they were discovered. And they did this by noticing the pattern of electrons and protons. And then they found out, oh, we're missing like two or three of them. And that's an example of us rationalizing our way into
Or yeah,
things we didn't know.
deducing things from observation. Yeah.
Yeah.
That like when Plato mentions that in, I forget which dialogue. I have the book right here. What is it? Is it the I don't remember. Is it the Crito? Is that the one? No. Meno? Is that the one where he works with the slave boy to kind of explicate the
I think that was Phaedo, but I'm not positive. But I think it was Phaedo. Yeah.
Okay. Well, we and you get the point. That because I remember learning that vividly in intro and even trying to wrestle with it years later. That for what everything I've read in Plato has always been the hardest thing for me to even like grasp at like a devil's advocate level to argue for it. Like I've always like it's always been very difficult for me to kind of come to terms with. Maybe it's just specifically the example he uses, because like
Wait, what do you mean?
in some ways when we were
Like
talking about
argue
it earlier,
against it, or to understand it?
I, like I felt like maybe it could be like the example with the slave boy never really sold me on it.
Hmm.
Like there's something about it seemed like it didn't make sense, and I couldn't really put my finger on it. Maybe I know, and I need to discover it.
Yeah. Because his
But it
the
just it's there's like I guess it's because there are so many implications from that being the truth. Like it is like kind of crazy how like to believe that there is so much that comes with believing in that, and I think maybe that's the kind of struggle with it.
yeah. Um. His terminology is like the to know belief and opinion is purely empirical. But the whole knowledge aspect, that is some sort of eternal remembering of your soul, like you're remembering things. It's like I don't know. I thought it was a terribly convincing argument. Not the part about like souls pre-existing, but the part about like there are these things that our minds are just able to latch onto or have like a affinity to, that we don't even need to like explain obviously or explicitly. Like to understand something as simple as 2 plus 2, you don't need to see two apples put beside another two apples and then count four apples. You don't need to see that in the real world. You can just kind of understand that 2, the abstract concept, plus another 2, an abstract concept that doesn't exist, will equal double of what it was, or 4. That makes sense.
I feel like I feel like what makes it tricky is that a lot of these like examples are really hard to kind of, for lack of a better word, like field test.
Yeah.
Because by the time we're even like sentient and smart enough to argue about this, the initial like onset of that is so far away. And also, even if we were to look at like someone kind of like remembering that for the first time, I mean, you could argue for a lot of this that there may have been like exposure to it previously that just wasn't remembered. Like there are things where like we hear it and it's like almost like we remembered it, but did we actually maybe we actually remembered it from something that was just so far away that it almost has just become like some abstract thing buried in our brain.
But the thing is,
Like it's hard because there's just so much experience.
but you always, it's not something you like could have maybe remembered. So like take like the most immediate uh sensation, like a baby fresh out the womb or even a fetus. Like you touch it and it understands that it's being touched. There's no learning that went into that, to understanding being touched. No one taught the baby that okay, when someone puts their finger on your face, then you're being touched. It's just like an immediate impression on your mind, and it cannot be taught. It's just innate. And I think that's what, to some extent, Plato's theory of forms was getting at. It's like some things are just baked into our psyche, our minds. They're already there. We can't learn them or
I,
be taught.
I would agree with that. The problem is you have to then extrapolate it beyond something like touch. Or another great example is laughter. Like laughter is learned very, very, very quickly. And it's like I'm pretty sure it's like one of the quickest things like babies pick up on. Like they just learn to kind of laugh. But you have to extrapolate that to then mathematics, to then truths, and that's where I think the challenge is in kind of believing that, because it starts the further you kind of go, the more the more you have to argue for it, like the harder it gets to kind of stand for it,
So like the
because then
further
there's
away
just so many
something
more
gets,
variables.
the further away something gets from a reflex or an
Yeah,
immediate sensation, that's where it starts to get tricky.
yeah, like a sensation is one thing, but like the understanding of like arithmetic and logic is a whole nother thing.
Yeah. And I think Plato would fight back or say that in that case, what's really going like yes, you're totally right in saying that there are some logical truths that are incredibly difficult to get to. And you need to basically train your brain and work your way up intellectually to be able to like understand those things. But they're available. They're already there. Would be what he's trying to say. It's like they already exist out there. We have the capacity to reach them, but we might just not be able to at the current moment or the way we're understanding things when it comes to like reflexes or going higher order than that. But they're always there
Where do
anyway.
you separate capability versus it being remembered? Because this sounds like, we're capable of it,
Mhm.
but does that imply that we remember it from, that like where does that separate between being compatible to do it? Because they're definitely not the same thing. We're compatible in, getting addicted to drugs, but Plato's not going to say that that's, some remembered like eternal truth. So where does that difference kind of line, compatibility versus remembrance of something eternal?
So there, it's I don't think saying compatibility would be like the appropriate word, but I think something closer would be like an affinity to understand or grasp concepts. We all
Okay.
have an affinity to grasp or understand concepts, but it's not like we need to match up or pair up with certain ideas, and then some people are incompatible or compatible with certain ideas or concepts. It's just that we might just need to train ourselves a little more intellectually if we want to grasp at these types of truths. But these truths have always been there. They're like in the sky and they're like floating around. They're eternal. They're in some sort of other dimension. And then we just need to find them, reach out and grab them. And we can all reach out and grab them, but sometimes reaching out and grabbing something takes effort. Um, and that would be, I think, where he would go. But it is a good question. Why must it be remembered? Um, because he
Yeah,
believes
I
in the
think that's where
form.
I got stuck. I got like hung up on that word because there's just so many implications with the word, like, what the affinity versus like remembered. Like there's just so like there's so much more you have to take with that one word change.
Yeah, yeah, you're right. It's very tricky. Are you Christian, Ducky?
I grew up Lutheran, but I was never too religious. I would say I'm probably agnostic.
Okay.
Although reading Augustine has been like way more interesting and profound than I kind of thought being kind of agnostic.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if I'm fully caught up. I think I'm like a book behind. I think I finished book 7. Where am I? I have my book right here. Yeah, I finished book 7.
Yeah,
So I'm like a book behind.
that's where we are basically. That's
Yeah.
probably
But it's been super interesting.
yeah, the problem of evil is something I'll never hopefully, well maybe eventually, but something I've never been able to get around or fully understand. And most or a lot of Christians I guess that I've met, they are also are just unable to answer it.
Yeah.
Have you heard of like I think the Japanese story where like this guy broke his leg and then the village is like, oh no, and then there's like a war that broke out and he didn't have to go to war.
Yeah,
So it turned out to be like a good thing. You know what I'm saying?
like to get out of war, he broke his leg or what?
Like something happened to his leg and it was seen like as a bad thing, and then a war broke out. So I'm just saying like
And it turned out to be a
evil
good
might
thing.
be relative or something.
Yeah, that's another really cool argument that's put forward when it comes to the problem of evil. It's like imagine something apparently bad happens. It seems bad at face value like for the first time. But it is for some sort of greater purpose or like it will all work itself out or it happened for a reason afterwards. Like that situation with the guy who broke his leg. Terrible thing that happened, but then he didn't have to go to war and maybe die. It's like it ended up being like a silver lining. And some people do rectify all of the evil in the world in that way. They say the
The
reason.
problem is that oh sorry,
No,
finish what
go.
you're saying, Chris.
No, go for it. Go for it.
I was gonna say the problem though is that oftentimes when people talk about evil in relation to God, we're not talking about someone breaking their leg. We're talking about like usually like mass death or terrible like I don't know, like a natural disaster, like something just completely random. You can even point to like man-made violence like wars.
Hmm.
Like it's not like, oh, this person was okay in the end, they suffered something but lived. We're talking about people like, some of the worst stuff, like a newborn baby that got a complication and died. It's like where it's difficult. And
Yeah.
one of the arguments that I hear the most, that's honestly I don't like it, but it seems like a common one that makes more sense than others, that actually tries to answer the question, is that we just don't know enough to truly understand the reasoning behind it,
Hmm.
which
Right? We don't know
is
the
really
greater
my
good,
point.
or we can't,
Yeah.
or even if there is. Well,
It's almost like if you were to look at a painting, but you're 1 inch away from the painting, and it's a huge painting. You're 1 inch away from it, so you can only focus in on a tiny area. You cannot call that
mhm.
painting beautiful, or you can't understand the meaning of the painting or what's
Mm,
Yeah,
what's going on, and that's what maybe like the world is with God. He can see everything. He knows everything. It's a beautiful masterpiece, but we're just stuck in our tiny little sliver, and we can't fully get the whole
yeah,
picture.
maybe.
That's a satisfying answer in my opinion. But
There's a there's a book. Like I haven't read it because I don't read,
that's
but
such
it's
bullshit. You
essentially the
do read.
concept. No, I don't.
You
No, I
do
don't.
read.
No, I don't, Chris. I
Okay.
can assure you.
All right.
I'm about to read. I'm about to read Plato's Five
Hell yeah.
Dialogues.
Hell
So
yeah.
that's yes, that's exciting. But there's a book, and the premise. Well, it's a short. It's a book containing multiple short stories, and one of the short stories says that a man wants to have a connection with God, right?
Mhm.
He believes in God, but God doesn't show up to Earth because last time he did that, we crucified him. Um, so then the way he gets his attention is by unleashing hell on Earth, right?
Mhm.
Being as wicked as he can, because he thinks if he separates himself from God, then God will come towards him.
Hmm. Separates himself from God. I don't understand why would he?
Well,
Not
it's like he wants the attention of God, so I guess his way is acting out, right? Rather childish.
like a yeah like a baby asking for attention.
Yeah, I'd say you better stop me, God, because if I don't, then this will happen.
Hmm.
Chris, I just remembered an argument about evil. It doesn't explain, I don't think it argues against the frequency of it, but you kind of see it in a lot of like fiction I consume, is that a world that is all good with no evil, there's no free will, there's kind of nothing. Like I very vaguely remember, it's like 4 years ago, but my religious professor talked about how, like, in heaven you kind of just become one with God. Like the free will of your human life kind of dissipates, because to have that kind of bliss with no evil, you have to just there's no freedom with that. Like, to have freedom, you have to have the freedom to do something bad and evil.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it, like I said, it does, but what I think the response to that is, well, is it really necessary that we have this much evil in the world? And I don't know how well it answers that, but I think that at least kind of answers why there is evil in the first place, because we wouldn't have freedom otherwise. There's just not, it's just not there. It's inconceivable.
Yeah, that's the argument for agency. It's like there is no like the perfect world would not be a world in which people are not free. People have to be
Mm-hmm.
free for there to be a perfect world, and we live in that world where people are free. However, freedom entails some evil acts or some messed up stuff. Um, so
Yeah.
that is it's a strong argument, but as you mentioned, yeah, there are what's it called, unnecessary evils like a paper cut or like stubbing your toe, like little things like that that don't seem to.
I was going to say like a natural disaster, but I guess that works too.
You can go both ways,
I
yeah.
uh, I have some questions. Do you guys think that man is naturally has an affinity towards good or evil, or is it a blank slate and then you can just essentially program?
Yeah, the whole.
I think there is some towards good, because we're social creatures and there needs to be some reciprocation of, like, sociability, which, if that it just our nature as social beings, there needs to be some good to, because a lot of what is good is, what is not good for just you, but the people around you.
That's called, yeah. What was it? Locke, John Locke. It's like tabula rasa, or like are we just a blank slate, versus are we predisposed to do things when we're born? I was thinking about that the other
Yeah,
day, or when I was, yeah, I was teaching that to my psych class the other day. And I'm very attracted to the idea that it's not that we are good or bad, um, but it's more so that we are selfish and then justify any of our actions as good. But I
yeah.
think, yeah, humans are just selfish. They're not good or bad, but they care about themselves. And that you can look at that as good, you can look at that as whichever way you want. But we're selfish. That's it. That's, I don't know, that's how I understand human nature.
Do you think only selfish, or like we will always have that part of us? Because I think it's an important distinction.
It is a very important distinction, and I'm not too sure. You could go both ways. You could say that anything else that seems like it's not selfish, at the end of the day it is truly selfish, like charity work or helping other people, really it's just because it makes us feel better. You could go that route, or you could say that no, like, people are genuinely and truly altruistic. Um, like when you're trying to save your son from dying, it's really just like an act of self-preservation because you see yourself in him. and you can try and justify any action through its selfish lens. Uh, but I don't know.
Yeah, because I remember this in my ethics theory and practice class. I learned it as in solely selfish, which was taught to me as like a logical fallacy, like ethical egoism. I don't know if that's completely different, but it's unfalsifiable in a way to say everything we do is selfish because you're assuming an intention of someone else, and you can always find a way to point that, me caring for my sick pet is actually me being selfish. And it's like, well, I don't think it's that, but you can say that. It becomes something that you literally, it's just unfalsifiable because it's you can always frame any action towards it if you view it in a certain way. And the best example I have gotten, disregarding the unfalsifiable nature of it, my teacher brought it up, is grief. Like I think that is the hardest argue is explaining away grief as a selfish action. Like my teacher gave a very extreme answer, but it's like, is a mom selfish who grieves for her son so much she literally just dies of grief, which is not some unheard of concept.
That happens.
I find that very hard to believe that there is some selfish cause of pity within oneself to bring themselves to that. It's just like, I think if any of us have experienced grief, like, yeah, maybe there's some part of it there in some cases, but for all cases, I don't know if I can say that.
I think that the idea, well, being selfish is actually, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's actually shown in different circumstances, right? So, larger trees in nature, for example, will absorb more sunlight than the smaller trees. Self-preservation is seen, or self-interest is seen throughout basically everything, right? uh, John Locke, social contract theory, that you give us certain rights in order to be part of a society that provides safety to everyone. I I talked to it. I talked about it to a professor about the purpose of society, and he said that it is to protect the logical from the illogical, right? The reasonable from the unreasonable. And I think that's a really good definition. The problem I have of trying to be really cynical and saying that any good action is ultimately beneficial to the one who acts upon it is that in some way you're trying to deprive the definition of the word good of its definition. Um, it's saying that, oh, you're trying to do something good, but actually benefits you. Either way, there is good being caused, right? Let's say that someone eats healthy, and that's seen as a virtue. Either way, that there is a benefit.
Yeah, I think that's actually a really good point that reminded me of something. Is think of like an example that on its face can look good, but you can view it as selfish. Is, let's say, like, I don't know, like your family wants you to do something and you'd kind of rather stay home. You can either, cancel on them and stay home and relax, or decide to, join them. You're not going to have a good time. Let's just presume that you go anyways. You can presume, you just wanted to save face. You didn't want the guilt of not being there. And there probably is some benefit, even if you decide to do it because, I made a commitment to my family. I'm going to stick to it. There still could be some good to it. And I think people look at that as, oh, it was a selfish action. But what if they stay home and they enjoy themselves more? Kind of taking like not really utilitarian lens, but if we look at through that lens just for now, to kind of look, oh, it'd be better if I stayed home, like that. There's more to that, but you can view both of them as selfish. You're like, oh, look, there's some benefit there, but they're not equally beneficial. So are they both selfish, or does it come down to the intention? Does it come down to you know the consequence? I guess. Like that's where I struggle with him, where it's kind of unfalsifiable because now that you kind of mention it, it seems like people who view every action as selfish look for just even a shred of benefit from something that seems bad and then take that and run with it, where it's like, well, they could have done something else that actually could have been more selfish and maybe been better. Like just the existence of a good in a like colloquially perceived selfless action doesn't mean it was selfish. It almost seems to presume that um all good actions should be done for themselves with no benefit there, and there is truth to that, but we can't do that completely. It's just kind of unreasonable.
You can't, yeah, you can't
Hannah
look at,
Arendt is really interesting.
you can't like look into someone's mind and understand their intentions. You can get, you can get close though, I think. There have been a lot of
Yeah.
experiments in when it comes to trying to measure intention, like when someone intends to do something or when someone just happens to do something. So there is some degree of like measurement that you can do, but it still is a little bit fuzzy as to how much you can
Hmm.
know when someone wants to truly do something for XYZ as opposed to another reason. Yeah, it's interesting.
There's just another argument about why God lets bad things happen, right? Um, because if God did stop them, then it would, or if He did interfere, then that would point to evidence of His existence, and then people who do good things wouldn't do it for the sake of doing good. They would do it out of some form of self-preservation or self-gratification, right? A type of moral desert.
Yeah. Man, if I have the book like right next to my bookshelf, but there's no way I'm gonna find it. If you can look up online if you're interested later in Hannah Arendt's The Human Condition, she has a chapter where she talks about like the ultimate good, and it is religious. It does have a lot of roots in religion. It's incredibly fascinating, and she essentially goes into the detail about. And sorry, I got a phone call. An underlying assumption we all have about good is she talks about how good is something that is done like because it is good with no intention of gain, and she goes into how like something that is truly good at the highest level, sorry, I keep getting a phone call, would be completely unknown. Like you would have to do it without being known, because then if you notice that someone sees you, you can confer, oh, this person did it to
Yeah.
like, look good to someone. And I feel like this kind of gets at that in a way. And I often think people don't talk about that, but it's kind of presumed with good. Because, oh, he just did that for monetary gain. He just did that to look good. He just did that for himself. And there's never going to be that pure good in the world. And I feel like people see that we don't get that ultimate good and then automatically presume bad intentions with the rest of it. Like just because we can't reach the perfect good doesn't mean that all of our actions are now selfish, because there's some gain or some possibility of an ulterior motive consciously or subconsciously.
I don't know that. Yeah, that's getting into like egoistic altruism or like egoism, I
Mm-hmm.
guess,
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
the literature. But I don't know, like just trying to think about that. I'm positive that everyone has had an experience or something happen where absolutely no one is watching. You did something good. You didn't tell anyone else. You didn't brag about it. You weren't looking over your shoulder. No one saw it. It was an absolute secret. And you still did something good. And you know it to yourself, right? Or maybe you've never done that, but I don't know. I feel like that's some pretty good evidence against egoism for some people.
A um, a kind of example of that is the shopping cart experiment, right?
Hmm.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Do you know the shopping cart experiment, Chris?
Yeah.
I
Let's see if someone will put it back.
yeah,
Yeah,
Mm.
it's kind of like it's like the altruistic action, because it's like,
A litmus
no
test
one's
for if
gonna
someone
care if you
did or
don't put
not.
it back.
Yeah. You can an egoist could justify that action. So say someone puts the shopping cart back, no one's watching or anything like that. The egoist could argue that it's the reason you're doing that unconsciously or just unknowingly is because you would want that to be the case for yourself. So it's
Yeah.
almost like you're trying to help yourself by putting this back, expecting that in some way, shape, or form that's going to be paid back in dividends to you if you do this, if you engage in these actions.
What? Being good is good?
Whoa.
Oh my god.
I gotta tell my professor about this.
Oh yeah.
We're on to something. Any particular
Yeah,
passages?
egoism is really hairy to like argue around, because like you can take any example, like I said, and just kind of warp it into what egoism says would happen.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I will say I cannot act like an egoist whenever people get dogs. I don't. I'm like, oh, you have a dog. It's obviously because you have a power fantasy.
Yeah. Or you just it's nice to have something that loves you unconditionally. Like it might just be like something it makes you feel good.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I like how my dog lays right next to me.
yeah. Look at you, Ducky, playing God.
Absolute god con. You can also make that argument for people who have kids. Why do you want a kid? It's to like make myself feel fulfilled. Yeah.
That's actually a really good point, because have I honestly struggle to think of reasons to have kids that aren't selfish. That is something that I've almost view from like an egoist lens, now that you kind of bring that up. Just with the, for me at least, the context of kind of the world right now, and if you look at like climate change and stuff specifically, if you know
Mm-hmm.
that, like, and just other things,
It's not real.
I I find it really hard when people talk about kids. It always feels like their reasons are selfish in a way, and I've kind of tried to wrestle with that.
I think yeah, it's hard. It's very very hard to make an argument that having kids, not adopting, but having creating more life
Mhm.
is an
Yep.
altruistic thing.
Yeah,
It's a tough,
when adoption centers exist, exactly.
it's a tough argument to.
Hey, hey, Ducky. I have a question. Do you think there's a difference between not creating the life and then ending the life for some kind of not utilitarian, but because their life would just end up to be hard.
I actually wrote like my prelude to my senior thesis on this. Like, it was called like philosophical methods. I started reading about like antinatalism, but instead I got into this conundrum about a woman who could have a kid, and if she has this kid, like Chris, he's gonna grow up and have some complications. But if she waits 3 months, she'll have another kid, Brock, who's not gonna have the complications. And it's like the choice to wait, or the will cease the existence of the original like chance of life. And it's like, well, is that moral? And I argued that yes, it is. I'd have to find the essay. I don't even know if I have it anymore. But
You know what a really
when we're talking
strong
about like,
a really strong argument against that point of view is it's a very immediate like thought experiment, and it's basically take anyone that exists on their deathbed and then ask them, would you have rather not existed? Would you have rather not lived? Most people are going to say, of course I would have rather lived. And that in itself, just like a out of probabilities, like most people are going to say, yeah, I would have rather lived, like this was, I would have rather existed than not. That in itself lends, I think it's a pretty strong argument for having kids, even though they might have terribly difficult lives and like shit might hit the fan. If at the end of the day they say I would have rather existed than not existed, then what you did was a good thing. It seems like.
that's a
Yeah.
good point for like just the act of having kids, but with I think there's a good example of like kind of my specific one with there's I when I took a medical ethics courses 20 I think it's 20 babies. 24 is kind of it's either 22 or 23. 24 is when they're really like viable and you can have them. You're not supposed to have them till like 40 weeks, but 24 is when they can kind of exist on their own. 20 oh yeah, it was 23. 22 they literally can't, they will die. 23 there was like a slim 1% chance, but it is obscenely expensive. About 1% of them live, and then the ones that do live, like 99% of them have extreme health complications. And it was like that, this moral conundrum to a like I would never want to be in medical ethics, man. Those are the hardest questions of ethics in the world to deal with, because they showed an example of someone who was severely handicapped and they're like, my parents are dying soon. I'm going to have no one who can take care of me, or I feel like a burden. I don't know what I'm going to do without them. And then you have another kid who was still grateful even though they had it. And then I think there was one kid who was born without any complications. But then there's also the 99 out of 100 who spend all this money, and it takes time to try and see if a 23-week baby lives. They spend all this money, wait all this time, and the baby doesn't make it. And then it's like, well, it's a 1% chance. The doctors say, this is almost never going to turn out good. But when you're the mother, all you're thinking about is that 1 out of 100.
Mm-hmm.
But the doctor doesn't see it that way because they've seen it time and time and again. And that I think your answer to that question says a lot about this kind of conundrum that I brought up,
Yeah.
because I think it's incredibly hard to answer. And you can find your anecdote if you look for it too.
Also, we only have the people that are. This might be terribly dark, but we only have the people who are still alive to ask these questions. There are plenty of
Yeah,
people that have rather not existed, and we can't ask them, would you have rather existed? Because they don't exist anymore. So it is a little bit, you can sidestep that and be like, okay, well, there's a lot of people who just aren't there to ask that question. Yeah.
that's true.
We have slim pickings.
It's a gamble.
Yeah, it's
Having a child or creating a life, at the end of the day, I think it is a gamble, but it's a good gamble. Everything in life is kind of like a probability gamble thing. Um,
yeah.
but I think that's a good gamble
Well,
to have because most people don't kill themselves. Most people don't regret existing at the end of the day or at the end of their lives.
Yeah.
yeah. Well, would you have
And
kids,
then
Chris?
what?
I'm just asking Chris if he would have kids. If he wants to have kids.
I want I don't know. I don't think I'll have kids, but I would adopt. That's a given. I think adoption it would be like my go-to. There are enough beings out there. I don't know about creating extra beings, but helping out
I
existing
think
beings, that's fine.
Hmm.
one thing that the anti-natalists would say to you, Chris, and I personally don't like this, even though anti-natalism and everything adjacent to it has kind of gripped me as much as I don't want it to. It's been like that thing where I'm reading it and I'm like, oh, I hate this. And I'm like, oh, I'm
Fuck,
having
that's a
trouble
good
arguing
argument.
against it. Like, ugh. But they would argue that like we aren't good arbiters of our suffering versus our, pleasant living. I don't know. I can't think of a word. So that's what they would want to say, and I don't really. I think they have way too negative of a view. I think it's better to kind of like concede that there are examples of people that definitely lived a life that they would say, and you could also confer that it was worth living. Like they didn't suffer unnecessarily for like a
Mm.
point to where you're like, maybe this wasn't worth it. But you kind of get into the egoist argument from earlier, where it's like you're guessing someone's own mind,
Someone's
which
intent.
you can do. You can do that, and there is validity. People don't always know what they believe in or believe what they actually believe or they
Yeah.
think they believe.
Yeah.
But when you hold an ideology to that, I think it gets sticky because you're conferring everything on everyone.
It's terribly personal. Terribly
Yeah.
like subjective. You can't make generalizable claims because well, you can make them as much as you want, but all you have is your own mind, and you just have to go off of that and hope that that's reasonable enough.
And you have like depending on how like you do or don't have a way of testing if it's good enough. And by that I mean you could, but if you didn't, you wouldn't really be able to know. Like if you're kind of like deluded and that leads to you having a deluded sense of the world, you could just potentially not be self-aware enough to realize that. Like no amount could change that. But there are some people who can. That's where it gets so tricky with the kind of taking a extrapolating people's intentions on stuff is like, well, am I a good enough arbiter to do that? And you can know, but sometimes you think you know and you don't. It depends. It's very tricky because we're all so different and sometimes so different that it's like almost like too different to kind of compare yourself universally to others.
It's also just like like a hard pill to swallow that at the end of the day there are a lot of people who would say I would have rather not existed. There's plenty of writers or philosophers that will go along those lines and be like, you know what, like life was cool and all, but it wasn't worthwhile. I stuck it out.
Yeah.
I'm on my deathbed now. It wasn't worthwhile though. I would have rather not existed.
Yeah.
Well, I think a good question is how do we determine the amount of pain that is justified for one to just not exist, right? I mean, this is kind of on topic, but there are like masochists, right? There are people who
Mhm.
enjoy the pain. I don't know if any of you guys have seen Hellraiser, but a very prominent theme of the movie is that pain is good. Pain, it's kind of like the movie Martyr. That pain helps us transcend.
Yeah. I hate to say, but I think I'm to some extent like pretty masochistic. Like sometimes I just do things for the sake of it sucking because it's
Oh
terrible.
yeah, me too.
Running a
Yeah.
marathon or something like that, like it
Absolutely.
just sucks. Why do you do
Oh,
it?
I
I
love cardio, bro. Yeah, maybe I'm very messy. I love cardio.
oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's a good point.
But we had I forgot who it was. I think it might have been um in psychology, but it was it wasn't even me who said it. It was someone who said that I've heard that the reason people cut themselves is to help them ground themselves, right? So
Mm,
it seems like maybe you just need to ground yourself, right?
possibly. Yeah.
You need to reaffirm you are human.
Yeah, people do harm themselves to reaffirm existence or to affirm non-dissociation, association.
To reframe your like masochistic claim, Chris, you could also say like to take a page out of Buddhism for a second, the life is suffering thing, which whether you want to take your whole philosophy view on that, I think it's if you take it at what Buddhism says, it is true. Like, which essentially, not that life is like inherently bad, but that every single life that exists will suffer at some point. To get hungry is to suffer, plainly as that. So is getting a cut, so is breaking your leg, whatever. And to go off that is like sometimes like you're going to experience pain. And I think sometimes maybe we all have some masochist, some like it's just like almost normal that that's expected. And sometimes a way to kind of cheat yourself out of that is to create your own pain with a direction towards something good. You run all the time, to run a marathon, to you finally run 26.3 miles or whatever the hell it is in kilometers, and look at that I busted my ass, and I had times where I ran and I finished and I threw up because I worked out too hard, and now I have this feeling that all of this work culminated in me being a part of a marathon with all these people, my family waiting for me and clapping. And it's kind of like, if pain's going to be inevitable, why not kind of almost take the reins and accept it, but put it towards something. Like it's almost kind of like, well, I'm gonna do this now, so later it's gonna be better.
I'm on that. I feel therefore I am grind set.
I feel therefore I am. I like that.
As someone with
Yeah.
ADHD, I feel that a lot because things are become a lot more difficult than I think they may be for other people, just because of like executive dysfunction. So a way to get around that is kind of to remind myself that once I do get through it and once I can get in the zone, it does get easier, and also that there is some benefit. And conversely, that there's a negative to doing things that are just like immediately gratifying. Because at the end of the day, we can't just sit and do nothing. We're gonna do something.
Even if we do
And
nothing.
yeah, like
Yeah.
doing nothing. What are you doing? Nothing. Are you staring at a wall? Are you like reading something, or are you watching mindless television? Are you eating? Are you writing? A lot of
Yeah.
those are things you're doing, and then when someone asks, "Hey, what'd you do today?" Nothing.
Yeah. I don't read.
That's bullshit.
No, it's not. It really isn't.
You do read. And you
No,
listen
I
to
don't.
audiobooks too. I know that much.
Oh,
Okay, I don't. Okay, look, I don't read, but I do listen to audiobooks.
you seem to take some pride in this.
No, I don't. Everyone keeps saying that. I just don't read.
Makes you feel different.
Yeah, it's my personality trait. It's my identity.
Hi, Mr. Fufu. Welcome. You've kind of missed the you kind of missed the book club discussion, but we're still talking about related stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We talked a lot about the problem of evil, or the nature of
Yes, I would
disobedience.
actually love to hear Fufu's because
I
I
don't have a
always see
problem
him
with
popping
it.
off in the theology chat.
I want to believe. I think I would love to believe in God or to have the faith that Augustine has. I just don't. I don't know.
I don't have a burning desire for that.
No.
I don't know. I wonder if like someday my lack of kind of having some connectedness or some higher power with the world will kind of snap into me and I'll have like some existential crisis. But as of now, it's like I have like interpersonal goals and external goals, and that's kind of enough to fill me in a way.
I wouldn't
And
call
like,
it I wouldn't call it like wanting to have like a connection or a higher power. But I would call it wanting to have an unshakable belief.
mm,
A belief that cannot be skepticized, if that's a if that's a verb. A belief that cannot be
Do you believe
questioned.
well,
that?
you mean that you wouldn't skepticize, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
What, like, let's play this game. Is why do you what about that is enticing?
The fact that I don't know what it's like would be a big component of it. I like experiencing new things or doing new things. It's the reason I don't know a lot of people will I don't know go kayaking
No,
or
yeah,
just go on a run or do anything because they want to experience new things. I've never experienced an unshakable belief to that degree.
yeah.
I kind of want to.
I think novel things is a very, I think, desirable thing, a very pleasurable thing as someone who loves novel things.
Do you truly believe in something, Cruz or Decky or Mr. Fufu?
Well, does believing mean that I have no skepticism towards it? Because I believe things, and there might be some shred of doubt there, but I can say,
Then it's
I'm
not
so confident
unshakable. If
enough
there's
in
a
it.
shred of doubt, then it's no longer unshakable. It's no longer a 100% thing. So what do you, without a doubt, believe, if anything?
I mean, at this point in my life, well, no, I guess I can't say that. I was gonna say, I like video games, and I'm like, well, maybe one day I'll be like, this shit is a waste of time, and I actually building shit. So I don't know. I don't know if I do. That's tricky. I don't know. I could pull a Descartes here, but I don't really do anything with that.
That's
Like
as
that
far
doesn't.
that's as far as I can go too. I'll just pull the Descartes card. I know
Yeah, but it's like, where do I go? Where do I go with that? Okay.
I don't get the
Yeah.
reference.
Descartes was all about he proved his existence through the existence of thinking. So like if you can think, then there must be something that's thinking. Or there must be something going on.
No,
Even
okay.
if you're doubting or you're questioning or you're hallucinating, there needs to be something there doing or engaging in that doubt. And if there's something engaging in doubt, then there is a thing. There needs to be a subject. So that's as far as I'll go. I will unshakably and undeniably say that yes, I exist. But I can't go further. He starts to say that since there's like he brings in God to the thing, and that God would give him what does he call clear and distinct clear and distinct reason or something like that, and then from there he can work out other truths. But I can't go that far yet. I can just affirm my existence. Anything beyond that, I'm a fucking skeptic, and it sucks.
What's wrong with having a strong belief in something, but not like full? I mean,
Go
Chris,
on.
I think a lot of people do want a desire for God, but I would think it would be fair to argue that I don't think if you kind of digged into someone that they would give the same reason as you would give. You
Yeah,
know,
a lot of people
like,
wouldn't. Yeah.
and I was gonna go somewhere with that, but it's just to say like, I mean, that's kind of like that topic's been discussed a lot of, religion was, a means to explain the world when we didn't have anything to explain it properly, or a comfort, community.
Yeah. It's very comforting or comfortable to know stuff.
Yeah, I think a lot of people view life very simply out of just a means to avoid unknown. I just notice that a lot, and like when I discuss things with people is, and maybe it's just because I'm it's reading all this philosophy, everything's kind of questioned, but you kind of poke into people's arguments, and you can get to like layer one, and they're like, oh, I never, considered that, or they kind of scramble. I think a lot of people just go and simplify everything, maybe out of fear, but maybe out of comfort, probably both.
Yeah, push anyone enough or engage in Socratic questioning enough and then they're cooked. Someone's screwed.
Yeah,
Your beliefs are screwed. You question someone enough, you're fucked.
I am scared how little I feel like I have to do it sometimes with people. I'm like, damn, man. I asked you one question.
That's it?
I
That's
uh, I think the only thing I know is that the card I exist, and that I don't know anything.
Well, you know you exist, so you know one thing.
I know one thing, but compared to everything else, how much
Yeah.
is that really?
Yeah. Infinitely small.
Yeah, but it's okay
Chris,
because I believe in a man in the sky.
would believing in God even be a certain belief? Because ask any religious person, I don't know if they refer to it as that. It's all in faith. You know, you might get someone who says that they believe it 100%, and maybe they do, but even then, there's faith underlying that. Does that make it a 100% truth,
I would say it
like you
does.
were talking about earlier?
I would say it does. That's what faith, or that's what proper faith entails, and we talked a lot about that during Fear and Trembling book club. About this leap of faith or the night of infinite resignation. It's a
Hmm.
complete
Well,
acceptance or belief in what have you, God. And then at that
well,
point, I'd argue, yeah. Sorry, continue.
Ducky, hey
Yeah.
Ducky, are you absolutely certain, right? There's no question in your mind that math, science, and physics is something concrete. That there's not a single conundrum or a single problem with the system.
That's kind of a loaded question because I mean I would say no, because there are people who there are mathematical proofs that have taken decades to disprove, and ones that have also taken decades to prove. Or well, I guess I don't know if it was a you can't. I don't remember. Um, but if we're talking like not our observation and our knowledge of it, but as a structure, science, I think is tricky because I don't think you can say that because there is science doesn't mean anything without some human meaning put into both creating the variables, doing the data, and also coming to conclusions that are valid through the structures we've created. I think the only one you could argue is math, but not from our perception or our knowledge of it, but just as like a concept mathematics. I don't think you could argue science because I think science can get kind of hairy with that.
Yeah, I agree with Mr. Fufu with what he said.